Greetings. I want to continue talking about Calvinism. I'm going to be looking at Calvinism and Hungary today. I think this may be a bit longer than the usual lecture. We'll see. If you look over my shoulder, you will see a poster. And that poster has on it a picture of Malcolm X with a machine gun looking out of a window and the inscription, "By any means necessary." In other words, that any methods can be used to impose or to promote, in his case, black equality and an end to the legacy of segregation. And I put this up not as an invitation to you to get your hunting rifles out of the cupboard, but instead because it represents one of the most important issues in political philosophy and in political theory. At what point is one allowed, or is it morally permissible, to take up arms and weapons against a state? At what point does a state lose its legality, become effectively unlawful, and at what point can you seek to overthrow it? And this is the big question in political ideas, and there's no easy answer to it. Various solutions have been proposed, and in the Middle Ages and early modern period, there is the example of Christ, who, on being asked a trick question about whether the Jews living in Palestine, Roman-occupied Palestine, should they pay taxes to Caesar, Christ replies, "Whose head is on that coin?" Answer, Augustus Caesar's. "Render to Caesar what is Caesar's." And this quotation was often used in the late Middle Ages, a bit into the early modern period, to justify quiescence, that one just has to put up with alien and unlawful rule. One should obey. There is the doctrine of obedience. This will come under challenge by Calvin. And Calvin doesn't go the whole way, just like he doesn't draw out the full implications of his doctrine of the elect. But his disciples, Calvin's followers, will. What Calvin broadly says, and you can see this at the end of the Institutes of the Christian Religion, is that on the whole, we should put up with bad government. But the Lord may send a divine avenger. A divine avenger like Gideon in the Old Testament, who will overthrow a bad government. The issue is not dealt with by Calvin. The issue then is, what do you do when the divine avenger comes? Do you stick by the government, or do you join the avenger in the overthrow of it? And I think reading Institutes of the Christian Religion leaves one in little doubt that when a divine avenger comes, since he's sent by God, you should follow him. So in other words, we will see within even the teachings of John Calvin that there is a belief that under certain circumstances a government can be resisted. Calvin himself puts trust in, I suppose, what we could call a balanced constitution, that there should be powers given to aristocracies, powers given to popular assemblies, and these should be able to ensure a responsible government that permits God's worship to continue to be allowed. He puts his trust in, if you like, the political composition of the state. But his disciples don't. By about the 1570s, 1580s, they've got a pretty firm idea being worked out, what they call the rights of lesser magistrates. They don't want any Tom, Dick or Harry to start going to war against the government. They don't want the peasants to start insurrecting. What they call is the rights of lesser magistrates, which is a very grand way of saying people lower down the political hierarchy, not at the bottom, but the middling type of officials, the sort of people who attend the diets, the sort of people who exercise government in the towns and the cities in particular, that these have rights and may oppose the government even to the extent of using force. And this idea is worked out in particular in France, but it spills over, and you'll see it affecting political discourse much more widely, that the better off sort of people, the more responsible sort of people, they can indeed take up arms against a lawful or unlawful government, because necessarily you take up arms against the government, you deny its legality. And this will subsequently in Hungarian history prove very important, and will be used in the beginning of the 17th century to justify insurrections against the Habsburgs. It will be apparent as well in by 1560s in the Netherlands, with a lot of iconoclasm, a lot of disregarding the government, but it will not be really until the 1570s, 1580s that a doctrine of resistance will be developed. One might draw in mind the Dutch national anthem, the Wilhelmus, the song of William of Orange, William the Silent, who leads the Dutch revolt with famous lines, "I have always honoured the King of Spain." In other words, he's saying that he has not taken up arms against the king, only against the king's bad generals and advisors. Hungary. Hungary is affected by Lutheranism in the 1520s, and I've mentioned before that it gets a foothold in the court, and it gets a foothold in the cities, that the principal parish church of Buda has a Lutheran preacher, Spiratus, I think, and it goes over, and large parts of the German population in Hungary and also in Transylvania go over to the Reformation. Particularly 1520s, but then again in much larger numbers in the 1530s. But this is not the nobility, and it's not the countryside. In the vast majority of cases, they stick by Catholicism. And this has been explained in several ways. Graham Murdoch, in absolutely excellent book, and I've provided a link on the website on Calvinism in Hungary and Transylvania. The first chapter is probably the one you need to look at, certainly at this point. Graham Murdoch basically argues that conditions in the kingdom in the 1520s and 1530s are too chaotic to allow the Protestant Reformation to spread, that things are too difficult, there's too much going on. And I think that's probably correct. I mean, if you've just been, Hungary's engaged in a civil war, haven't got the circumstances really where people can reflect on religious issues. Oh, it's fallen down, how appropriate. They can't reflect on religious issues, and as a consequence, Lutheranism makes no progress in the countryside. That's the one argument. But I think there's another argument, and it's the same argument as why the Slovene peasant population in Carinthia and Carniola don't go over to the Reformation, and that's because they think of it as the German religion. It's the religion that the Germans have. And Luther is very German. I've mentioned before, he's very German in his jokes. He's he communicates in German. All the literature is mostly in German. So if you are a Hungarian without much of a knowledge or any knowledge of German, you're going to find it difficult to firstly warm to Luther and secondly to understand what he's going on about. But Calvinism is different. Calvinism comes out of Switzerland. Calvin is from Geneva, which is French-speaking. It's not tarred in the same way with the brush of Germanism. It publishes in Latin, as well. I mean, every language it's in, but the originals are in Latin. A majority of Hungarians can cope with Latin, or a lot of Hungarians can cope with Latin. They continue using Latin until the 19th century in Hungary. And when Arnold Toynbee visits Hungary at the beginning of the 20th century, he discusses with the Hungarian barons in Latin. So they're going to be able to read Latin, the Institutes of the Christian Religion are in Latin. They're going to be able to reflect on Calvinist literature. And it's not going to seem German in the same way as what Luther's ideas are. And Calvinism spreads very rapidly indeed. It spreads in particular in eastern Hungary, on the Great Hungarian Plain, and has its big centre in the city of Debrecen, which is the Hungarian Geneva, as it's known, and also in Transylvania. And it is embraced by the local nobility, who see themselves as godly gentlemen. They see themselves as, if you like, evangelical missionaries, preaching and ensuring that preachers are appointed to spread the new faith. And their peasants generally come into line. Hungary is a feudal kingdom in the sense that there is a nobility and they control the villages, or at least parts of villages, depending on where you are. So in other words, it spreads amongst the nobility and then moves downwards. And as it moves downwards, it blends into all sorts of other beliefs and becomes often millenarian, by which we mean apocalyptic, the belief that the end days are coming, and that there is going to be the big showdown between Christ and the devil's disciple, the Antichrist. They believe that the world is about to end, and therefore there's an urgency in order to make it pure and society aligned to the gospel message as they read it. In Transylvania, it's not just Calvinism that spreads, it's Unitarianism as well. And in about 1570, something like that, the ruler of Transylvania, he's just given up the title of King of Hungary and settled for Prince of Transylvania instead. John II, John Sigismund, John II Sigismund as he's sometimes known, he's the son of Zapoya. He embraces Unitarianism. So we have, I think, the only Unitarian ruler in the world operates in Hungary and Transylvania. Transylvania itself is religiously mixed. The majority population actually is Orthodox. They're Romanians who were converted to Orthodoxy at a time when we're not sure about, but they are Orthodox, and they're under their own priests, and they have their own churches. They always have had, and they attend Orthodox worship. The Germans in Hungary tend to be Lutherans, and the nobility, who are mostly Hungarian, actually quite a large number of the nobility of Romanian origin, but in order to enter the nobility they have to at least give up the outward appearance of orthodoxy and embrace anything but, really. And these nobility, they are, some remain Catholic, some are Calvinists, and some are Unitarians, anti-Trinitarians, and the Transylvanian Diet in 1568 says we're not going to establish a leading religion, we're going to give comprehensive religious toleration. We're going to recognise 4 religions: Unitarianism, Catholicism, Lutheranism, Calvinism, and we're not going to do anything about Jews, Armenians, Orthodox. We'll allow those to continue. And so a religiously neutral state is founded. It doesn't last particularly long, because very shortly afterwards a Catholic prince takes over and he becomes rather more persecuting. He puts the Unitarian preacher Ferenc David in prison and he dies there. You can still see his shrine in the hilltop fortress of Deva. There it is on the mountain top, and below is a commemorative shrine to all the great Romanian Olympic athletes. So we have on the hill the shrine to Ferenc David, at the bottom a shrine to Romanian athleticism. Wonderful. But nevertheless, these religions prosper, largely unpersecuted. How come Calvinism is so popular? I've in a sense suggested that there is a lack of obstacles, in the same way different to Lutheranism, where obstacles are there in terms of Luther and Germanness. Why should it be followed? I think there are several reasons for this. Firstly, Calvinism believes in divine plans, and it will explain the problems that Hungary has: civil war, Turkish eruption, in terms of divine providence, that this isn't some unfortunate accident. It is part of God's purpose that is being worked out. And there's something more to it than that. In 1995, I visited a Serbian monastery in Montenegro. And there was a monk there who spoke absolutely flawless American English, even though he had never left Montenegro. Absolutely astonishing. And he was a Serbian monk in Montenegro. And he said something off the. He said that it's one of the reasons why the Serbs have been particularly blessed. And I said, how do you know the Serbs have been particularly blessed? He said, because we've suffered so much. And there's a truth there, and you will find it in the Old Testament, in the story of the original Jews, that they suffer because God cares for them. He punishes them for their sins. And it's that punishment that shows that he cares. If he didn't care, then he'd just let them get on with it. But he does care. And he brings them to heel by punishing them by the Babylonish captivity, by being made slaves of the Egyptians and things like that. That shows that God cares. And that same idea starts being promoted as early as the 1530s in Hungary, that there is an analogy between the sufferings of the Jews in the Old Testament and the sufferings of Hungarians, that their suffering is part of a divine plan, and that divine plan is seen in the Old Testament, and it is related to the providence of God, his control over all human events, his omniscience, his omnipotence, his greatness. What makes him so big and us so small is that there's a plan, and that plan shows that the Hungarians are part of the elect. They have been chosen by God. It's a very nourishing thought. Thank you.